Hi everyone, welcome to Twisted Betrayal. I know you can't sleep, so I'll accompany you through the darkness with stories of deception, secrets, and the betrayals that shatter lives. These are true cases from around the world, where trust was broken and lives were forever changed. Before we begin, I'd like to know, where are you listening from tonight? Drop a comment and let me know. And if you find comfort in these stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a case. Now, let's settle in. Turn off the lights, close your eyes, and let me take you into the first story. The Quiet House. Jennifer Ross was born on the 12th of April, 1981, in Portland, Oregon. She came into the world during a spring rainstorm. Her mother would later recall, the kind of rain that makes everything smell clean and new. She grew up in a family that valued privacy above all else. Her parents, Margaret and David Ross, ran a small independent bookstore in downtown Portland called Chapter and Verse. It had been in the family for 3 generations. The store occupied the ground floor of an old brick building, and the family lived in the apartment upstairs. Jennifer spent most of her childhood surrounded by novels and silence. She would sit in the corner of the store after school, reading everything she could get her hands on. Mystery novels were her favorite. She loved puzzles, patterns, the satisfaction of solving something complex. Teachers described her as thoughtful and reserved. She didn't have many friends, but the ones she kept were close. There was something careful about Jennifer, even as a child. She chose her words deliberately. She observed before she acted. When she was 15, her father suffered a heart attack while shelving books in the history section. He survived, but the family dynamics shifted. Margaret became more protective. Jennifer became more independent. She started helping more at the store, learning the business, understanding how things worked. After high school, Jennifer enrolled at Portland Community College. She wasn't sure what she wanted to do with her life, but she knew she loved books, libraries, the quiet order of organized information. She declared a major in library science. It was during a night class on cataloging systems that she met Thomas Chen. He sat 3 rows ahead of her, always arriving exactly 5 minutes early. He took meticulous notes in a leather-bound notebook. He never participated in class discussions unless called upon, but when he did speak, his answers were precise and correct. Jennifer noticed him because he reminded her of herself. Quiet, contained, comfortable with silence. They were paired together for a group project in their second semester. The assignment was to create a filing system for a fictional company's records. Most students treated it as busy work. Thomas and Jennifer treated it seriously. They met at the library twice a week to work on it. Their conversation started with the project but expanded slowly. Thomas told her about growing up in a strict household. His parents were both accountants who expected perfection. Jennifer told him about the bookstore, about her father's heart attack, about feeling like she was always waiting for the next bad thing to happen. They found comfort in each other's carefulness. Neither of them rushed into anything. Their relationship developed the way ice forms on a window, gradually and with precise patterns. They dated for 2 years before Thomas proposed. The wedding was small, held at the courthouse with just immediate family present. Jennifer's parents approved of Thomas. He was steady, they said. Reliable. Someone who would take care of their daughter. The couple bought a modest 2-bedroom house in Beaverton in 2008. It was a quiet suburb, the kind of place where neighbors waved but didn't intrude. Perfect for 2 people who valued their privacy. Jennifer got a position at the Multnomah County Library System. She worked in cataloging, which suited her perfectly. She could spend her days organizing information, creating order out of chaos, and she rarely had to interact with the public. Thomas continued his work at a tax preparation firm called Precision Financial. He was good with numbers, meticulous with details. His clients appreciated that he never missed a deadline and always found every possible deduction. Their life together was predictable in the best way. Thomas left for work every morning at 7:30. Jennifer left at 8:15. They both came home around 6. They ate dinner together, usually something simple. They watched television or read. They went to bed at 10:30. Neighbors rarely saw them. The Chens kept to themselves. Their lawn was always mowed. Their mailbox was always emptied. Their car was always parked in the same spot. Everything about their life suggested order and routine. But routines can hide things. Predictability can be a cover. On the 14th of October 2011, Jennifer called in sick to work. Her supervisor, Linda Huang, noted this was unusual. Jennifer had only missed 3 days of work in the past 2 years, and each time she had called at least a day in advance. This time, she called at 7:45 in the morning, just 30 minutes before her shift. Linda tried calling Jennifer's cell phone around noon to check on her. The call went straight to voicemail. She tried again at 2 o'clock. Same result. She left a message asking Jennifer to call back when she felt better. Thomas came home from work at his usual time, 6:15. He parked in the driveway, like always. He walked to the front door and noticed it was unlocked. This was unusual. Jennifer always locked the door, even when she was home. He called out for her as he stepped inside. The house was dark. No lights on. No sound of the television. Just silence. He walked through the living room, past the kitchen. Everything looked normal, clean, organized, exactly how Jennifer kept it. He climbed the stairs to the second floor. The bedroom door was open. He could see the bed from the hallway. Jennifer was lying on top of the covers, fully clothed in the same outfit she'd worn the day before. A plastic bag was tied over her head. Duct tape secured it around her neck. Thomas stood in the doorway for what he would later estimate was 30 seconds. Then he pulled out his phone and called 911. The police arrived within 6 minutes. Paramedics were right behind them. They found Thomas sitting on the front steps, his phone still in his hand. He was staring at the street, not moving, barely blinking. The paramedics went upstairs. They confirmed what was obvious. Jennifer was dead, had been for hours. Detective Sarah Morrison was the first investigator on scene. She was 42 years old, 17 years on the force, and had seen her share of suspicious deaths. She walked through the house carefully, taking note of everything. The front door showed no signs of forced entry. Neither did the back door or any of the windows. Every entrance was locked from the inside except the front door, which Thomas said he'd found unlocked. In the bedroom, Detective Morrison examined Jennifer's body without touching it. The plastic bag was clear, the kind you'd find in any grocery store. The duct tape was a common brand, silver, wrapped 3 times around Jennifer's neck. Jennifer's arms were at her sides. Her legs were straight. She looked almost peaceful, except for the bag. There were no signs of struggle, no defensive wounds on her hands, no bruising, except for faint marks on her wrists that were barely visible. The medical examiner arrived at 7:30. Dr. Raymond Park had been doing this work for 23 years. He examined the body in place before having it transported to the morgue. He noted the wrist bruising immediately, faint but present. The pattern suggested restraints, though there were no restraints on the body now. He also noted petechial hemorrhaging in the eyes, consistent with asphyxiation. Time of death was difficult to determine precisely, but based on body temperature and rigor mortis, Dr. Park estimated Jennifer had died between 2 and 4 in the afternoon. While the medical examiner worked, Detective Morrison questioned Thomas. He sat in the living room, his hands folded in his lap, answering every question in a flat, measured tone. He said he'd been at work all day. He'd left the house at 7:30 that morning. Jennifer had still been in bed. He'd assumed she was sleeping in because she'd called in sick. He'd gone to work, attended meetings, reviewed client files. He came home at his usual time and found her. Detective Morrison asked if Jennifer had seemed depressed. Thomas said no. She'd been her normal self, quiet, focused, content. Had there been any problems in the marriage? No. They rarely argued. They both valued stability. Did Jennifer have any enemies? Anyone who might want to hurt her? Thomas said no. Jennifer barely interacted with anyone outside of work and family. Morrison asked Thomas for permission to search the house. He agreed immediately, signed the consent form without hesitation. The search turned up something interesting. In the bathroom, crime scene technicians found several spots of blood in the sink basin. Small amounts, but enough to test. The blood had been wiped away, but luminol revealed the traces. There were also faint bloodstains in the grout between the bathroom tiles. Someone had tried to clean them, but blood is difficult to remove completely. This suggested the killer had spent time in the house after the murder, cleaning up, hiding evidence. Thomas's alibi was checked immediately. His coworkers at Precision Financial confirmed he'd been in the office all day. He'd attended a 10 o'clock meeting. He'd had lunch with a client at noon. He'd been at his desk, working on tax returns until 5:30, when he left for the day. Security cameras at his office building confirmed his car entering the parking garage at 7:42 in the morning and leaving at 5:31 in the evening. Traffic cameras showed his vehicle taking the usual route home, arriving in his neighborhood at 6:12. His alibi was solid, airtight. The medical examiner's full autopsy revealed more details. Jennifer had not been sexually assaulted. There were no drugs or alcohol in her system. The faint bruising on her wrists suggested she'd been restrained at some point, possibly with fabric or rope, something soft enough not to leave deep marks. The plastic bag had been secured with duct tape around her neck, tightly enough to cut off air completely. Death would have taken approximately 3 to 5 minutes. The manner of death was officially changed from suicide to homicide. Detective Morrison began looking into Jennifer's life more carefully. She interviewed coworkers at the library. Everyone described Jennifer the same way: quiet, professional, competent. She kept to herself, but was always polite. No one could think of anyone who would want to hurt her. No conflicts, no drama. One coworker, Michael Sorrell, mentioned that he'd tried to be friendly with Jennifer when she first started, but she hadn't seemed interested in socializing. Morrison looked into Michael. He was 41 years old, unmarried, lived alone in southeast Portland. Coworkers described him as awkward, but harmless. He'd worked at the library for 6 years without incident. Jennifer's supervisor mentioned that about a year earlier, Jennifer had quietly requested to work on a different floor. When asked why, she'd said she preferred a quieter workspace. The supervisor had accommodated the request without thinking much of it. But when Morrison pressed, the supervisor admitted that Michael had been working on the same floor as Jennifer before the move. She didn't know if there was a connection, but Morrison made a note of it. Michael was brought in for questioning on October 17, 3 days after Jennifer's death. He seemed nervous, but cooperative. He denied ever being at Jennifer's house. He said he barely knew her beyond saying hello in passing. When asked about Jennifer's floor change, he admitted he'd tried to talk to her several times about books. He thought they might have shared interests, but she always seemed annoyed, so he stopped trying. Morrison asked where he'd been on October 14 between 2 and 4 in the afternoon. Michael said he'd been at work. His time card confirmed he'd clocked in at 9 and didn't leave until 5. The detective had his apartment searched. They found nothing linking him to Jennifer's death. No duct tape matching the brand used in the murder. No plastic bags of the same type. No evidence he'd ever been to her house. The investigation stalled. Thomas had an alibi. Michael had an alibi. No physical evidence pointed to anyone specific. Jennifer's parents were devastated. They couldn't understand who would do this to their daughter. She lived such a quiet life. She didn't bother anyone. She just wanted to be left alone to do her work and come home. Her mother, Margaret, told police that a few weeks before her death, Jennifer had mentioned feeling like someone was watching her. She thought she'd seen the same car parked across the street from her house multiple times. A dark sedan, she'd said, but she'd never written down the license plate. She thought maybe she was being paranoid. Police canvassed the neighborhood asking about strange cars. No one remembered seeing anything unusual. Most neighbors didn't pay much attention to cars that weren't parked directly in front of their own homes. Then, 3 months after the murder, Thomas moved out of the house. He told Jennifer's parents he couldn't stay there anymore. Every room reminded him of her. He needed a fresh start. He put the house on the market and relocated to Seattle. He took a job at an accounting firm there. He told Jennifer's family he needed distance from the memories. Jennifer's father found this suspicious. He called Detective Morrison and insisted they investigate Thomas more thoroughly. Morrison explained that Thomas had an ironclad alibi, but she agreed to look into his background again. Thomas Chen had no criminal record. His financial record showed no unusual transactions, no large cash withdrawals, no suspicious purchases. His new employer in Seattle confirmed he was a model employee, punctual, Professional. Meticulous. There was nothing to suggest Thomas was involved. The case went cold. Jennifer's parents continued to push for answers, but the leads dried up. The file sat in the cold case division for years. In 2018, the Beaverton Police Department assigned a retired detective named Harold Grant to review old unsolved cases. Harold had spent 30 years on the force before retiring. Now he worked part-time, reviewing cold cases, looking for anything that might have been missed. He picked up Jennifer's file in March of that year. He read through every report, every witness statement, every piece of evidence. Something bothered him about the duct tape. The brand used to secure the plastic bag was a specific type sold primarily in hardware stores. It was stronger than standard duct tape, marketed toward contractors and serious DIYers. Harold decided to check if anyone connected to Jennifer had purchased that specific brand in the weeks before her death. He contacted hardware stores within a 10-mile radius of Jennifer's house. Most stores didn't keep purchase records going back that far. But one store, a small family-owned hardware shop in Beaverton, still had their old transaction logs stored in boxes in the back room. Harold spent 3 days going through receipts. On the 4th day, he found something. On the 8th of October 2011, 6 days before Jennifer's death, someone had purchased a roll of that exact brand of duct tape. The purchase was made with a credit card. The name on the card was Thomas Chen. Harold immediately contacted Detective Morrison, who was now a lieutenant. She pulled Thomas's original statement. He'd said he and Jennifer were donating some old books, and he'd used duct tape to seal the boxes. Morrison obtained a warrant to search the storage unit Thomas had rented in Seattle. Inside, they found boxes of old books. The boxes were sealed with duct tape, the same brand, but the forensic team noticed something. The tape on the boxes had been applied smoothly, in single strips. The tape on Jennifer had shown signs of being applied, removed, and reapplied. The adhesive patterns were different. The team concluded that someone had practiced the technique before using it on Jennifer, testing the application method, making sure it would work. This was enough for a new warrant. Police searched Thomas's current residence in Seattle. His apartment was as neat and organized as his old house had been. Everything in its place. Nothing out of order. Except in his home office, in the back of a filing cabinet, they found a hard drive. It wasn't connected to anything. It was just sitting there, wrapped in a plastic bag. The hard drive was taken to the forensics lab. What they found was damning. Files dating back to 2011. Research on undetectable poisons. Searches for how long it takes to suffocate someone with a plastic bag. Detailed notes on creating an alibi. A timeline showing exactly when Thomas needed to be seen at work to avoid suspicion. There were also drafts, practice runs. Thomas had written out different scenarios, testing which method would be least likely to leave evidence. He'd researched police investigation techniques. He'd studied how detectives build timelines. The most chilling file was labeled simply October 14. It contained a minute-by-minute plan for the day Jennifer died. 7:30, leave for work, be seen by neighbors. 7:42, arrive at office, use keycard to establish timestamp. 9:55, leave office through side exit, no cameras, drive home. 10:15, return home, convince Jennifer to comply by threatening her parents. 11:1, wait to establish proper time of death window. 1:15, execute plan. 1:30-2, clean bathroom, remove evidence. 2:15, return to office through side exit. 2:30, attend scheduled meeting. The plan had one flaw. Thomas hadn't counted on the hard drive being found. He'd kept it, perhaps as a record of his success, perhaps because he was too meticulous to destroy evidence completely. Thomas Chen was arrested in Seattle on the 3rd of May 2019. His defense attorney argued the hard drive had been planted. There was no way to prove Thomas had created those files. Anyone could have put that hard drive in his filing cabinet. But the prosecution had more. They'd analyzed Thomas's work computer. The IT department had never fully wiped it when he left his old job. Buried in the system were browser history fragments, showing searches for undetectable murder methods and how police investigate spousal murder. The dates matched the files on the hidden hard drive. They also had the duct tape. Forensic analysis showed that the tape used on the boxes in Thomas's storage unit and the tape used on Jennifer came from the same roll. Microscopic imperfections in the adhesive matched. And they had something else. A witness came forward during the trial. A woman who worked at a gas station near Thomas's office. She remembered seeing him on the 14th of October 2011 because he'd paid with a credit card at exactly 10:20 in the morning. She remembered because his card had declined and he'd seemed extremely agitated, which was unusual for such a calm-looking man. The timestamp put Thomas away from his office during the exact window when Jennifer was murdered. The trial lasted 6 weeks. The jury heard testimony from forensic experts, from Thomas's co-workers, from Jennifer's family. They saw the hard drive contents. They saw the duct tape analysis. They saw the timeline. The jury deliberated for 4 days. On the 22nd of August 2019, they returned a verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. Thomas Chen showed no emotion when the verdict was read. He sat perfectly still, his hands folded in his lap, the same way he'd sat 8 years earlier when police first questioned him. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge called the crime exceptionally calculated and cold-blooded. Thomas never explained why he killed Jennifer. He never spoke about the planning or offered a motive. Psychiatrists who evaluated him said he showed signs of narcissistic personality disorder and a need for control, but Thomas refused to engage with their assessments. Jennifer's parents attended every day of the trial. When the verdict was read, her mother wept quietly. Her father sat in silence, his hand on his wife's shoulder. Afterward, they gave a brief statement to the press. Margaret Ross said, "We waited 8 years for this moment. Jennifer was our only child. She deserved better than what Thomas gave her. She deserved better than dying in fear in her own home." Thomas is currently incarcerated at Oregon State Penitentiary. He has filed 2 appeals, both of which have been denied. He spends his days in the prison library organizing books. Jennifer's parents visit her grave every Sunday. The house where she died was torn down in 2012. A small park stands there now. The neighborhood association named it Jennifer Ross Memorial Park. There's a bench with a plaque that reads, "In memory of Jennifer Ross, who loved quiet places." The bookstore her parents owned closed in 2015. They couldn't keep running it after Jennifer's death. The building was sold to a coffee shop. But sometimes, late at night, neighbors say they can still see a light on in the upstairs window where the Ross family used to live. Thanks for staying with me. That case still haunts those who remember it. A quiet house, a careful husband, and 8 years of secrets. But our next story takes us in a different direction. This time, we're not looking at a methodical plan, but a sudden vanishing that defies explanation. Let me tell you about a teenager who walked into a tunnel with his friends and simply disappeared. The vanishing hour. Ethan Price was born on the 3rd of September 2004 in Boulder, Colorado. His mother, Carol, went into labor during a late summer thunderstorm, the kind that rolls down from the mountains and shakes the windows. Ethan was the middle child of 3 boys. His older brother, Marcus, was 3 years older. His younger brother, Dylan, came along 2 years after Ethan. Carol often joked that her middle son was the wildest of the 3, the one who kept her up at night worrying. His father, Robert, managed a sporting goods store called Summit Outfitters in downtown Boulder. The store sold everything from camping gear to rock climbing equipment. Growing up, Ethan spent countless hours in that store, learning about carabiners and harnesses, studying route maps, listening to experienced climbers talk about their latest conquests. Carol worked as a nurse at Boulder Community Hospital. She worked the night shift 3 days a week, which meant she was home during the day when the boys got back from school. She made sure they did their homework before they went outside to play. Ethan loved the outdoors from an early age. By the time he was 8, he was hiking trails with his father and older brother. By 10, he was rock climbing at the local gym. By 13, he'd summited several of Colorado's smaller 14ers. Friends described him as adventurous and confident, sometimes to the point of recklessness. He was the kid who'd take the harder trail, the steeper climb, the riskier jump into the lake. He wasn't showing off, exactly. He just didn't seem to understand fear. the way other people did. Teachers at Boulder High School knew Ethan as a B student who was more interested in the climbing team than academics. He was well-liked, popular with both athletes and non-athletes. He had an easy smile and a habit of making people laugh, even when they didn't want to. By his junior year, Ethan had become an accomplished climber. He won several regional competitions. He placed third in the state championships. Colleges were already reaching out to him, offering partial scholarships to join their climbing programs. His parents supported his ambitions but worried constantly. Climbing was dangerous. One mistake could be fatal. Carol made Ethan promise he'd never climb alone. Robert made him promise he'd always check his equipment twice. Ethan promised, but his parents weren't sure he truly understood the risks. The spring of 2021 was difficult for everyone. The pandemic was still affecting daily life, though restrictions were beginning to ease. Ethan had spent most of his junior year doing remote learning, which he hated. He missed his friends, missed the climbing gym, missed being outdoors without worrying about social distancing. By early June, when school finally let out for the summer, Ethan was restless. He'd been cooped up for over a year. He wanted adventure. On the 7th of June 2021, Ethan and 3 of his friends made plans to explore an area they'd been talking about for months. There was an abandoned mining tunnel in the mountains outside Boulder, about 45 minutes from town. The tunnel had been closed to the public since the 1960s, but local teenagers often snuck in to explore. The group consisted of Ethan, his best friend Jake Morrison, and 2 other friends from the climbing team, Sophia Chen and Liam Rodriguez. They'd all been friends since freshman year. They decided to go on a Monday afternoon. School was out. Their parents thought they were going to the climbing gym in town. None of them mentioned the tunnel. They left Boulder around 3 in the afternoon. Jake drove. His parents had given him their old SUV when he turned 17, and it had become the group's default transportation. They took Highway 119 Northwest out of Boulder, then turned onto a Forest Service road that wasn't marked on most maps. They parked at an old trailhead that hadn't been maintained in years. The parking area was overgrown with weeds. There were no other cars. They grabbed their backpacks, which contained flashlights, water bottles, energy bars, and their phones. The hike to the tunnel entrance took about 40 minutes. The trail was steep and rocky, winding through pine forests and across a dried-up creek bed. Ethan led the way, as he usually did. He'd studied satellite images of the area and had a rough idea of where they were going. The tunnel entrance was partially hidden by overgrown brush and a rusty chain-link fence that had been cut open years ago. A faded sign warned, "Danger, unstable structure, no trespassing." The group squeezed through the gap in the fence. The tunnel mouth was dark, a perfect circle carved into the mountainside. Cool air drifted out, carrying the smell of damp earth and old stone. They turned on their flashlights and went in. The tunnel was wider than they'd expected, about 12 feet across and 10 feet high. The walls were rough-hewn rock, glistening with moisture. Old mining rails ran along the floor, rusted and partially buried in sediment. They walked single file, with Ethan in front and Jake bringing up the rear. Their footsteps echoed. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness ahead. The temperature dropped the deeper they went. About 200 yards in, the tunnel opened into a large chamber. It must have been a central hub back when the mine was operational. Several smaller passages branched off from the main chamber, leading deeper into the mountain. The group stopped to rest and look around. The chamber was impressive, like something out of an adventure movie. Their flashlight beams revealed old mining equipment scattered around. A broken wheelbarrow, rusted pickaxes, sections of wooden support beams rotting against the walls. Sophia took some photos on her phone. Liam found some old graffiti on the walls, names and dates going back to the 1980s. Jake sat on a rock formation and drank some water. Ethan wandered toward the far wall of the chamber, where one of the side passages began. He called out that he'd found something interesting, though the others couldn't hear exactly what he said. The acoustics in the chamber made everything echo strangely. Sophia turned to say something to Liam. The conversation lasted maybe 30 seconds. When she looked back toward where Ethan had been standing, he was gone. At first, they thought he'd gone into one of the side passages. Sophia called out his name. No response. Jake walked over to the passage where Ethan had been standing and shined his light down it. The passage was narrow and twisted out of sight after about 20 feet. He called Ethan's name louder. Still nothing. The three of them started to worry. They called out repeatedly, their voices echoing through the chamber and down the various passages. They waited for a response. Silence. Jake tried calling Ethan's cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. No service underground. They spent the next 15 minutes searching the chamber and the nearby passages, calling Ethan's name, looking for any sign of where he'd gone. It made no sense. He'd been right there. They'd only looked away for a moment. Finally, Sophia said they needed to call for help. They ran back through the main tunnel toward the entrance. Once they were outside and had cell reception, Jake called 911. The call came in at 4:57 in the afternoon. Boulder County Search and Rescue was notified immediately. The first teams arrived at the trailhead by 6 o'clock, while there was still daylight. Ethan's three friends led the rescuers to the tunnel entrance. They explained what had happened, showing the rescuers the exact spot where Ethan had been standing when they last saw him. The search began that evening and continued through the night. Teams with powerful lights, thermal imaging cameras, and search dogs entered the tunnel system. They explored every passage branching off from the main chamber. They called Ethan's name constantly. They listened for any sound of movement, any sign of life. They found nothing. The tunnel system was more extensive than anyone had realized. Some passages extended hundreds of yards into the mountain. Others dead-ended after only a few dozen feet. Many were partially collapsed, with unstable ceilings that could cave in at any moment. By midnight, more than 30 searchers were involved. They'd mapped out most of the accessible tunnel system. They'd used dogs to track any scent. They'd set up motion sensors at various points in case Ethan was moving through areas they'd already searched. Still nothing. Ethan's parents were notified around midnight. Carol collapsed when the sheriff told her. Robert immediately drove to the trailhead demanding to join the search, but the incident commander told him it was too dangerous for untrained civilians. The family waited at the command post that had been set up in the parking area. Marcus and Dylan came too, sitting in silence, staring at the tunnel entrance, willing their brother to walk out. The search continued for 5 straight days. Teams rotated in and out, working in shifts. They used every tool available. Thermal imaging cameras to detect body heat, ground-penetrating radar to check for voids or chambers that might not be connected to the known tunnel system, drones equipped with lights to explore passages too unstable for humans. They found old mining equipment, discarded water bottles from previous explorers, graffiti on the walls, but no trace of Ethan Price. On day 3, the search expanded beyond the tunnel. Volunteers combed the surrounding forest. Maybe Ethan had exited through a different entrance. Maybe he'd gotten disoriented and wandered out into the woods. They found nothing. The story made national news. Experienced cave rescue specialists flew in from around the country to help. Everyone wanted to find the missing teenager, but the tunnel had swallowed him completely. By June 12, 5 days after Ethan disappeared, the active search was scaled back. The incident commander explained that they'd explored every accessible part of the tunnel system. They'd checked and rechecked every passage. They'd found no evidence that Ethan was still in there. The police began considering other possibilities. Had Ethan planned this? Was he trying to run away? Had something else happened? Detective Amanda Torres was assigned to investigate. She interviewed Ethan's friends extensively, separately, and together. All 3 told the same story. They'd been in the chamber. Ethan had wandered toward the far wall. They'd looked away for less than a minute. When they looked back, he was gone. Torres pushed them on this. Was it really less than a minute? Could it have been longer? Could Ethan have said something about leaving? About exploring a different area? The 3 friends were adamant. It had been seconds, maybe 30 seconds at most. Ethan hadn't said he was going anywhere. He'd just been looking at something on the wall. Torres had the chamber examined again. The wall where Ethan had been standing was solid rock. There were no hidden passages, no openings, just stone. She looked into Ethan's background. He was doing well in school. He had a girlfriend, Emma Lawrence. He was excited about college. He'd just been accepted to Colorado State with a partial scholarship for climbing. His bank account showed no unusual withdrawals. His social media showed no signs of distress. His last post, made the morning of June 7, was a photo of climbing gear with the caption, "New carabiners finally came in, ready for summer." There was no indication he was planning to disappear. Emma told police that Ethan had texted her that afternoon around 3:45, right before the group entered the tunnel. The message said, "Going on a hike with Jake and crew. Call you tonight." There was nothing after that. Then, on June 29, 22 days after Ethan vanished, a hiker found something strange. About half a mile from the tunnel entrance, lying in a creek bed that had recently filled with runoff from mountain snowmelt, was a cell phone. The hiker recognized it might be evidence and called the police. Detective Torres arrived within an hour. The phone was badly damaged. The screen shattered. The casing cracked. It looked like it had been thrown against rocks or dropped from a height. The phone was sent to a forensics lab. Despite the water damage, technicians managed to retrieve some data. The phone belonged to Ethan Price. The last text message sent was to Emma at 3:51 in the afternoon on June 7. The message read, "In the tunnel. Pretty cool in here." There were no calls made after that, no additional texts, no internet searches. The phone had either been turned off or had lost power shortly after that message was sent. But how did it get into the creek bed half a mile from the tunnel? The area where it was found was downhill from the entrance, in a direction Ethan's group hadn't hiked. Someone would have had to carry it there. Police returned to the area and searched the creek and surrounding woods for an entire day. They found nothing else. No clothing, no backpack, no other belongings. Months passed. The case grew colder. Ethan's family continued to search on weekends, hiking the trails around the tunnel, putting up flyers in nearby towns, posting on social media. Carol appeared on news programs, pleading for information. Robert offered a reward for any information leading to finding his son. In November 2021, 5 months after Ethan disappeared, a local man named Derek Foster contacted the police. He said he'd been near the tunnel area on June 7 and had seen some things that might be relevant. Detective Torres interviewed him immediately. Derek said he'd been hiking a different trail that day, one that passed within a quarter mile of the mining tunnel. He'd seen a group of teenagers heading up the trail toward the tunnel around 3:30 in the afternoon. He hadn't thought much of it at the time. Teenagers explored that tunnel all the time, despite it being illegal. But then, about an hour later, around 4:30, Derek had been heading back to his car when he saw someone else, a man, alone, coming down from the direction of the tunnel. The man was carrying a large hiking backpack. Derek remembered thinking it was odd to see someone hiking alone so late in the day. The man had been wearing dark clothing and a baseball cap pulled low. Derek hadn't gotten a good look at his face. Torres pressed for more details. How old was the man? Derek guessed maybe 30s or 40s. Hard to tell from a distance. Height? Tall, maybe 6 feet. Build? Average, maybe slightly heavy. Race? Derek thought white, but again, he hadn't gotten a close look. Any distinguishing features? Derek couldn't remember any. Just a man in dark clothes with a backpack. Torres had Derek work with a sketch artist. They created a composite image based on his description. The sketch showed a man with a generic face, baseball cap, no distinctive features. It could have been almost anyone. The sketch was released to the public. Tips came in, but none led anywhere. Several people claimed to recognize the man, but the leads evaporated under investigation. In March 2022, 9 months after Ethan vanished, a group of hikers made another discovery. Deep in the woods, about 3 miles from the tunnel in a completely different direction, they found a backpack hanging from a tree branch. It was Ethan's backpack. His parents recognized it immediately from photos the police showed them. Inside were his wallet, his keys, a water bottle, and some energy bars. Everything was there, except his phone, which had already been found in the creek. The area was immediately searched. Cadaver dogs were brought in. They alerted in several spots, but when the areas were excavated, nothing was found. The dogs may have been picking up scents from decomposing animals. The police began to suspect foul play. The backpack's location made no sense. It was miles from where Ethan had disappeared, in terrain his group hadn't explored. Someone must have carried it there. But who? And why? Detective Torres became convinced that the man Derek Foster had seen was responsible. The timeline matched. The man had been leaving the area around the time Ethan disappeared. The backpack suggested someone had deliberately moved Ethan's belongings to confuse the investigation. But without evidence, without a suspect, there was nothing Torres could do. She interviewed dozens of people who lived in the area, showed them the composite sketch, asked if anyone had seen anything unusual that day. She got nowhere. Ethan's father became obsessed with finding the man from the sketch. He spent months driving around Boulder County, showing the image to people at gas stations, hiking supply stores, coffee shops. He got nowhere. The case was officially classified as a cold case in 2023. The file remained open, but active investigation ceased. The police said they would pursue any new leads, but without evidence, they had nothing to go on. Ethan's family refuses to give up. His mother still keeps his room exactly as he left it. His climbing gear hangs on the wall. His trophies from competitions line the shelves. His girlfriend, Emma, graduated from high school and went to college, but she says she thinks about him every day. Every year on Ethan's birthday, the family returns to the tunnel entrance. They leave flowers and a framed photo of Ethan at the trailhead. Other climbers have started leaving their own tributes: carabiners, chalk bags, notes written on pieces of paper stuffed into the fence. The tunnel entrance has become a memorial, though no one knows for certain what happened there. Ethan Price has been missing for over 3 years. He would be 19 years old now. His family still searches, still hopes, still waits for answers that may never come. The mining tunnel remains closed, but people still go there. Some are teenagers looking for adventure, some are searchers looking for clues. And some, late at night, report hearing sounds from deep in the tunnel. Footsteps, voices, the sound of someone calling for help. But when they investigate, they find nothing. Just darkness and silence and the cold mountain air. Some mysteries have no answers. Ethan Price remains missing, and his family still searches. But not all betrayals happen in dark tunnels or remote locations. Sometimes, the cruelty comes from the people living right next door. Let me tell you about a woman whose passion was destroyed by envy. The neighbor's garden. Diane Foster was born on the 18th of July, 1973, in Asheville, North Carolina. She came into the world during a heat wave, her mother would later recall. The kind of heat that makes the air shimmer and the pavement soft. She was an only child, raised by her mother, Patricia, after her father left when Diane was 6 years old. Patricia worked 2 jobs to keep their small apartment in West Asheville. She cleaned houses during the day and worked as a waitress at night. Diane learned early to be self-sufficient. She'd come home from school to an empty apartment, do her homework, make herself dinner. She didn't complain. She understood her mother was doing everything she could. What Diane loved most was being outside. Their apartment complex had a small courtyard with a few struggling flower beds. While other kids played basketball or rode bikes, Diane would sit in the courtyard, pulling weeds and trying to coax the flowers to grow. She had a gift for it. By the time she was 12, the courtyard looked better than it had in years. Neighbors complimented Patricia on her daughter's green thumb. Diane would smile shyly and talk about soil pH and root structure and the importance of proper drainage. In high school, Diane excelled in biology. Her teachers encouraged her to consider a science career. She was particularly interested in botany, the study of plants. She'd spend hours in the library reading about native species, invasive species, plant genetics. She earned a scholarship to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She studied botany and graduated with honors. After graduation, she took a job at a garden center in Durham while pursuing a master's degree in horticulture. She loved the work. She could identify hundreds of plant species by sight. She knew which plants thrived in shade and which needed full sun. She understood companion planting, soil amendments, pest control without chemicals. Customers at the garden center would seek her out specifically for advice. She was patient and thorough, never condescending, always willing to explain things in a way that made sense. In 2003, at age 30, Diane married Alan Foster. They'd met at a community garden where they were both volunteers. Alan was a high school biology teacher, quiet and thoughtful, with a similar appreciation for the natural world. They moved to a quiet neighborhood in Durham, not far from the garden center where Diane worked. They bought a small ranch-style house with a large backyard. The yard was nothing special when they moved in. Just grass and a few scrubby bushes. Diane transformed it. Over the next 6 years, she turned that ordinary backyard into something remarkable. She designed it carefully, creating different zones. A shade garden under the trees with hostas and ferns. A butterfly garden with milkweed and coneflowers. A vegetable plot with raised beds. A native plant section with species that attracted local birds and pollinators. She built meandering paths using salvaged bricks. She installed a small pond with a recirculating pump. She created sitting areas where you could rest and listen to the birds. Neighbors would walk by and stop to admire it. Diane was always happy to share cuttings, offer advice, explain what she was growing. She joined the local gardening club. She volunteered at community gardens. She wrote articles for the neighborhood newsletter about sustainable gardening practices. Her garden became known throughout the neighborhood. People would make detours on their evening walks just to pass by and see what was blooming. Next door lived Carol and Raymond Hayes. They were in their early 60s and had lived in the neighborhood for over 30 years. Their house was well maintained, their lawn neatly mowed. But their yard was plain, just grass, a few foundation plantings, nothing remarkable. Carol was friendly enough. She'd wave when she saw Diane outside. She'd occasionally chat over the fence about the weather or neighborhood news. Raymond was quieter, more reserved. He'd nod in greeting but rarely initiated conversation. In the spring of 2009, Diane noticed something troubling. Several of her plants in the side yard were dying. She'd planted them the previous fall. They'd made it through winter, and now they were suddenly wilting. At first, she thought it might be a fungal disease. She treated them with an organic fungicide. The plants continued to decline. She checked for insect damage. Nothing. No aphids, no spider mites, no beetles. She tested the soil pH. It was normal. She increased watering. The plants got worse. By early summer, an entire section of her garden had died. 6 rose bushes, a row of lavender, several ornamental grasses, all brown and withered. Diane was devastated. She'd spent years cultivating those plants. She consulted with experts at the garden center where she worked. They were puzzled. The symptoms didn't match any common plant disease. One colleague suggested the soil might be contaminated. Diane had the soil tested at a local agricultural extension office. The results came back showing abnormally high levels of salt, specifically sodium chloride, table salt. Diane couldn't understand it. She didn't use salt-based fertilizers. She was careful about what went into her garden. The salt had to have come from somewhere. She began to suspect sabotage, though the thought seemed absurd. Who would poison her garden? And why? She decided to install a small motion sensor camera aimed at the affected area. Just a cheap security camera she ordered online. She mounted it in a tree, camouflaged it with leaves, and set it to record when it detected movement. 3 nights later, at 2:17 in the morning, the camera captured something shocking. Raymond Hayes, her neighbor, climbed over the fence that separated their properties. He was carrying a plastic grocery bag. He walked directly to the section of Diane's garden where the plants had died. He opened the bag and poured something onto the soil. White granules. Salt. He walked along the affected area, distributing the salt evenly, then climbed back over the fence and disappeared into his own yard. Diane watched the footage with disbelief. Raymond? Quiet, polite Raymond? Why would he do this? She checked the camera footage from previous nights. The camera had only been up for 3 days, but Raymond appeared on 2 of those 3 nights, always after midnight, always with a bag of salt. Diane showed the footage to Alan. He was as shocked as she was. They debated what to do. Confront Raymond directly? Go to the police? Diane decided to go to the police first. She wanted documentation, wanted this on record. She went to the Durham Police Department on the 15th of June, 2009. She showed the footage to an officer at the desk. The officer watched it, seemed uncertain how to proceed. He said it looked like trespassing and vandalism, but he'd need to consult with a supervisor. The supervisor came out, watched the footage, and seemed reluctant to get involved. He suggested it was a civil matter, not criminal. Maybe Diane should talk to a lawyer. Diane pressed. This was trespassing. This was destruction of property. The officer finally agreed to take a report and said they'd follow up with Raymond. 2 days later, an officer went to Raymond's house. Diane wasn't present for the conversation, but she learned later what was said. Raymond denied everything. He claimed he'd never been in Diane's yard. The footage was too dark to clearly identify anyone. It could have been anyone. The officer showed him the video. Raymond said the person in the video wasn't him. Without a confession, the officer said, there wasn't much they could do. The video was somewhat grainy. It was taken at night. A defense attorney could argue it was inconclusive. Diane was furious. She'd caught Raymond on camera, but apparently that wasn't enough. She installed more cameras. She put them at different angles, covering more of her property. She also installed motion sensor lights that would illuminate anyone who entered her yard. For several nights, Raymond stayed away. Diane thought maybe the lights had scared him off. Maybe knowing he'd been caught would make him stop. Then, one night in early July, the cameras caught both Raymond and Carol. At 1:43 in the morning, both of them climbed over the fence together. Carol was carrying 2 bags of rock salt, the kind used for de-icing driveways in winter. Raymond had a garden spreader. Together, they dumped entire bags of rock salt onto Diane's garden. They used the spreader to distribute it evenly across a wide area. They worked quickly, methodically, for about 15 minutes. The footage was clear. Their faces were visible under the motion sensor lights. There was no question who they were or what they were doing. Diane took the new footage to the police the next morning. This time, the officers agreed there was enough evidence to press charges. Both Raymond and Carol Hayes were brought in for questioning. Initially, they both denied it. But when shown the clear footage from the night before, Carol broke down. She started crying, saying she was sorry. She didn't know why they'd done it. Raymond remained silent, staring at the table. The detective interviewing them asked Carol directly, "Why did you poison your neighbor's garden?" Carol's answer was chilling in its pettiness. She said Diane's garden made theirs look bad. When people walked through the neighborhood, they always stopped to admire Diane's yard. They'd compliment it, take photos, ask Diane for advice. No one ever noticed the Hayes' yard. Carol said it started small, just a little salt here and there. She'd read somewhere that salt would kill plants. She thought if Diane's garden looked less perfect, maybe people would stop paying so much attention to it. But when Diane didn't seem to notice the damage at first, Carol escalated. She wanted to destroy the entire garden. She wanted Diane to give up gardening altogether. Raymond admitted his role, but insisted it was Carol's idea. Carol claimed Raymond had been the one to suggest using rock salt because it was harder to detect than other methods. They were both charged with criminal mischief, trespassing, and destruction of property. The district attorney considered additional charges related to stalking and harassment, but ultimately decided the current charges were sufficient. Diane was relieved to have answers, but the damage to her garden was extensive. The salt had saturated the soil in large sections of her yard. It would take years to flush it out, to restore the soil to a condition where plants could grow. Some of the plants she'd lost were rare cultivars she'd spent years nurturing. Others were gifts from friends or cuttings from her mother's garden before her mother passed away. They were irreplaceable. She considered suing Raymond and Carol for damages. Her lawyer said she had a strong case, but calculating the value of the destroyed plants was difficult. How do you put a price on years of work, on irreplaceable specimens? The case went to court in October 2009. Raymond and Carol both pleaded guilty. The judge was clearly disturbed by their actions. He called it a spiteful and cruel campaign of harassment. They were each sentenced to 1 year of probation and ordered to pay restitution to Diane. The amount was determined by calculating the replacement cost of the destroyed plants, the cost of soil remediation, and the cost of Diane's time in restoring the garden. The total came to $8,000. The judge ordered them to pay jointly. Raymond and Carol remained in their house next door. They were forbidden from contacting Diane or entering her property as part of their probation conditions, but that didn't make living next door to them any easier. Diane would see them sometimes, coming and going from their house. They never made eye contact. They stopped maintaining their own yard. Weeds overtook their garden. Their grass grew long. Paint peeled from their house. Other neighbors were appalled when they learned what Raymond and Carol had done. Some stopped speaking to them entirely. Others confronted them, demanding to know how they could do something so petty and cruel. The Hays became pariahs in the neighborhood. They stopped attending community events. They stopped participating in neighborhood association meetings. They became reclusive, rarely leaving their house. Diane tried to move on. She began the slow, painful process of rehabilitating her soil. She had truckloads of the most contaminated soil removed and replaced. She added organic matter to help flush out the remaining salt. She planted cover crops to help restore soil health. But the joy she'd once felt in her garden was gone. Every time she stepped outside, she thought about Raymond and Carol watching her from their window. She thought about them climbing her fence in the middle of the night, methodically destroying something she loved. In 2011, after 2 years of living next to the people who'd tried to destroy her garden, Diane and Alan decided to move. They sold their house and relocated to a neighborhood across town. Diane started a new garden at their new house. She installed security cameras immediately. She kept her garden plans to herself. She stopped giving interviews to gardening magazines. She stopped offering advice to neighbors who asked. The openness and generosity she'd once shown was replaced by caution and suspicion. She built a tall privacy fence. She planted hedges to block sightlines from neighboring properties. She created a beautiful garden, but one that she kept hidden from the world. Raymond Hays died in 2015 of a heart attack. He was 73 years old. Carol moved to a nursing home shortly after. She's still alive, though suffering from dementia. She doesn't remember Diane, or the garden, or what they did. The house next to Diane's old home was sold to a young family with 2 small children. They never learned what had happened in the garden next door. Diane still gardens. She's 51 now, but she says it's different. She's more guarded. She doesn't share cuttings or invite people into her yard the way she used to. She doesn't join gardening clubs or volunteer at community gardens. When asked about it, she says the betrayal changed something fundamental about how she sees the world. She'd always believed that beauty was something people appreciated, something that brought joy. She'd never imagined it could inspire such hatred. The lesson she learned, she says, is that not everyone wants to see you succeed. Some people, when they see something beautiful that isn't theirs, don't feel inspired or uplifted. They feel resentful. And that resentment can poison them more thoroughly than salt ever poisoned her garden. Jealousy can poison more than plants. It can poison trust, communities, and the simple joys we take for granted. Our next case shows us another kind of poison, one administered by someone who spent years perfecting his revenge. Let me tell you about a locked room and the man who made it look like suicide. The Locked Room. Marcus Webb was born on the 8th of November, 1969, in Memphis, Tennessee, on a Saturday afternoon. His mother, Dorothy, went into labor during a church service. The congregation prayed while she was rushed to the hospital. Marcus was the youngest of 4 children. He had 2 older sisters, LaShonda and Tamika, and 1 older brother, Jerome. His father, William, worked at the Ford Motor Company plant in Memphis, assembling cars on the line. Dorothy cleaned houses for wealthy families in East Memphis. The Webb family lived in South Memphis, in a small house on Delaware Street. Money was always tight. William's factory wages supported the family, but there was rarely anything left over. Dorothy's cleaning money went toward keeping the children clothed and fed. Despite the financial struggles, the Webb children were expected to excel. William and Dorothy believed education was the path out of poverty. They pushed their children to study hard, stay out of trouble, get good grades. Marcus was naturally gifted with numbers. By 3rd grade, he was doing math problems his 6th grade brother struggled with. His teachers noticed. They moved him to advanced classes. They talked about his potential, about college, about opportunities. His siblings were proud of him, but also jealous. Marcus got more attention from their parents because of his academic abilities. He got special treatment, special encouragement. In high school, Marcus continued to excel in mathematics and science. He was quiet, studious, more comfortable with equations than with people. He had few friends. He spent lunch periods in the library, working ahead in his textbooks. Teachers encouraged him to apply to colleges. He earned a full academic scholarship to the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. He was the first person in his family to attend a 4-year university. His parents were incredibly proud. His father cried when Marcus graduated from high school. Dorothy told him he was going to change the family's future. At the University of Tennessee, Marcus majored in engineering. He struggled socially but thrived academically. He graduated with honors in 1991 and was immediately recruited by several companies. He took a job at a manufacturing company called Precision Components in Knoxville. The company made specialized parts for industrial machinery. Marcus started as an entry-level engineer, but his work ethic and technical skills quickly got him noticed. By his mid-30s, Marcus had worked his way up to senior project manager. He oversaw teams of engineers, managed million-dollar projects, interfaced with major clients. He was respected throughout the company. Colleagues described him as brilliant but somewhat distant. He was all business, never one for small talk or office socializing. In 2006, at age 37, Marcus married Sandra Liu. She was a graphic designer he'd met at a technology conference in Nashville. Sandra was 32, creative and outgoing in ways that Marcus wasn't. Friends wondered what they saw in each other, but those close to them understood. Sandra brought lightness to Marcus's serious nature. Marcus brought stability to Sandra's more chaotic creative life. They bought a house in a suburban development outside Knoxville, a nice 3-bedroom ranch with a 2-car garage. The neighborhood was quiet, safe, filled with young professionals and families. Marcus was known for being methodical and organized. He kept detailed spreadsheets of their household expenses. He maintained the house on a strict schedule, changing furnace filters every 3 months, cleaning gutters twice a year, servicing their cars exactly when the manual recommended. Sandra sometimes teased him about his need for order, but she appreciated his reliability. She knew exactly what to expect from Marcus. He was consistent, dependable, predictable. They talked about starting a family, but wanted to wait until their careers were more established. Sandra was building her design business. Marcus was up for a vice president position at work. They had time, they thought. On the 11th of February 2013, Marcus called in sick to work. This was highly unusual. Marcus rarely missed work. In his 22 years at Precision Components, he'd used maybe a dozen sick days total. His supervisor, Tom Chen, noted the absence but didn't think much of it. Everyone gets sick sometimes. Marcus had accumulated weeks of unused sick leave over the years. He was certainly entitled to take a day. Sandra was traveling for work that week. She'd flown to Atlanta on Sunday for a design conference. She wasn't due back until Wednesday evening. She texted Marcus that Monday afternoon around 2 o'clock. "How are you feeling? Need me to bring anything home?" Marcus replied a few minutes later, "Feeling better. Resting. See you Wednesday." That was the last communication anyone had with Marcus Webb. When Sandra returned home Wednesday evening, she found the house dark. Marcus's car was in the garage. She called out for him as she entered through the kitchen. No response. She went upstairs. The bedroom was empty, bed unmade. The bathroom showed signs of recent use, but Marcus wasn't there. His home office door was closed. She knocked. No answer. She tried the handle. Locked. She knocked harder, called his name. Nothing. Growing worried, she retrieved the emergency key they kept in their bedroom and unlocked the office door. Marcus was slumped over his desk, his head resting on his arms like he'd fallen asleep. But when Sandra touched his shoulder, his skin was cold. She immediately called 911. Her voice on the recording was shaking but coherent. "My husband. He's not breathing. I think he's dead. Please send someone." Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes. They confirmed what Sandra had discovered. Marcus Webb was deceased. Based on the body's condition, he'd been dead for at least 24 hours, possibly longer. Detective Michael Santos was assigned to the case. He arrived at the house around 8 o'clock that evening. The paramedics had left Marcus's body in place. pending the medical examiner's arrival. Santos did a careful walkthrough of the house. No signs of forced entry, no signs of struggle. Everything was neat and orderly, exactly what you'd expect from someone like Marcus. The office door had been locked from the inside. Sandra had needed a key to open it from the hallway. The windows in the office were closed and locked from the inside. On Marcus's desk was a small empty vial, the kind that might contain medication. Next to it was a glass with a small amount of water remaining, and there was a note. The note was handwritten, addressed to Sandra. It said, "I'm sorry, I can't explain. Please forgive me." The medical examiner, Dr. Patricia Reeves, arrived around 9 o'clock. She examined the body in place before having it transported to the morgue. She noted no obvious signs of trauma, no wounds, no bruising. Marcus appeared to have died peacefully, though his lips showed a slight bluish tint, suggesting possible hypoxia. The autopsy was performed the following morning. Dr. Reeves found something immediately. Marcus Webb had died from cyanide poisoning. The toxicology report showed lethal levels of cyanide in his bloodstream. Death would have occurred relatively quickly, within minutes of ingestion. The police investigation intensified. Cyanide poisoning was rare, and it required access to the chemical, which wasn't easy to obtain legally. A search of Marcus's office revealed the source. In a locked drawer of his desk, investigators found a small vial. Chemical analysis confirmed it had contained potassium cyanide. The vial was nearly empty. Everything pointed to suicide. Marcus had been alone in a locked room. He had access to cyanide. He'd left a note. The medical evidence was consistent with self-administered poisoning, but those who knew Marcus found this impossible to believe. Sandra told investigators that Marcus had shown no signs of depression. He'd been his normal self, methodical, focused, content with his life and work. He'd been excited about an upcoming project at work. They'd been planning a vacation for later in the year. Tom Chen, Marcus's supervisor, said the same thing. Marcus had seemed fine at work. No unusual stress, no conflicts, no problems with performance or relationships. His family was equally confused. Dorothy Webb told police that Marcus had called her the previous week, and they'd had a normal conversation about family news. He'd mentioned coming to Memphis to visit soon. Detective Santos pressed everyone. Was there anything unusual in Marcus's life? Any financial troubles? Marital problems? Health issues? Nothing. Marcus's finances were in perfect order. His marriage was stable. His most recent physical examination showed no health problems. The note bothered Sandra. She told Santos that the handwriting looked like Marcus's, but something about the wording felt wrong. She couldn't explain exactly what, just that it didn't sound like something Marcus would say. Santos brought in a handwriting expert. The expert examined the note and compared it to known samples of Marcus's writing. The expert's conclusion: the note was written by Marcus Webb. But Sandra remained unconvinced. She hired a private investigator, a former police detective named Thomas Brennan, to look into Marcus's death. Brennan started by reviewing Marcus's recent activities. He examined Marcus's computer, his phone records, his bank statements. He interviewed coworkers and friends. What he found was curious. Marcus's computer showed a search history that included several queries about cyanide poisoning in the 2 weeks before his death. Searches like how much cyanide is lethal, and symptoms of cyanide poisoning, and where to buy cyanide. But when Brennan looked more closely at the timestamps, something seemed off. Several of the searches had been conducted during work hours, at times when Marcus was logged into meetings or known to be away from his desk. Brennan examined the computer more closely. He found evidence of remote access software that had been installed 3 weeks before Marcus's death. The software would allow someone to control Marcus's computer from another location. Someone had been accessing Marcus's computer remotely, conducting searches designed to make it look like Marcus was researching suicide methods. Brennan took this information to Detective Santos. Santos reopened the investigation immediately. The IT department at Precision Components was brought in to analyze the remote access software. They traced it back to an IP address registered to a man named Kyle Brennan, no relation to the private investigator. Kyle Brennan had worked at Precision Components from 2005 to 2008. He'd been a project engineer in the same department as Marcus. They'd known each other, worked on projects together. But Kyle had left the company under controversial circumstances. In 2008, both Kyle and Marcus had applied for a senior project manager position. Marcus had been chosen. Kyle had been passed over. According to former co-workers, Kyle had been bitter about the decision. He felt he'd been more qualified, that Marcus had gotten the position through politics rather than merit. Kyle had left the company 3 months later and moved to Virginia. Detective Santos located Kyle in Richmond, Virginia. He was working for a different engineering firm. Santos contacted Virginia police and asked them to bring Kyle in for questioning. Kyle denied any involvement in Marcus's death. He admitted to being upset about the promotion years ago, but he said he'd moved on with his life. He had a good job, a girlfriend, a fresh start. Santos obtained a warrant to search Kyle's apartment. Forensic analysis of Kyle's computer confirmed that the remote access software had been operated from that machine. Further investigation revealed Kyle's planning had been extensive and meticulous. He'd been planning Marcus's murder for months, possibly years. He'd created a detailed plan, step by step, designed to make Marcus's death look like suicide. Phase 1. Install remote access software on Marcus's work computer. Kyle had done this during a visit to Knoxville in January 2013. He'd told former co-workers he was in town visiting family. He'd stopped by the office to say hello. He must have accessed Marcus's computer during that visit. Phase 2. Use the remote access to create a digital trail suggesting Marcus was researching suicide methods. This would establish a pattern, make it seem like Marcus had been planning to kill himself. Phase 3. Obtain cyanide. Kyle had worked for a chemical supply company for a brief period in 2010. He'd kept contacts in that industry. He'd been able to purchase a small amount of potassium cyanide through an old colleague, claiming he needed it for electroplating experiments. Phase 4. Practice forging Marcus's handwriting. Kyle had obtained samples of Marcus's handwriting from old work documents he'd kept. He'd practiced for months until he could replicate Marcus's script convincingly. Phase 5. Travel to Knoxville and execute the plan. Kyle had taken vacation time from his job in Virginia in early February. He'd driven to Knoxville, staying at a budget motel under a false name. He'd broken into Marcus's house on February 10, a Sunday, while Marcus was at the gym and Sandra was traveling. He'd unlocked a window in the home office, creating his entry and exit point. On February 11, Kyle had sent Marcus a text from a burner phone, pretending to be a colleague from work, asking Marcus to review an urgent document. The document was a fake, designed to lure Marcus into his office alone. Once Marcus was in the office, Kyle had entered through the window he'd unlocked earlier. He'd confronted Marcus with a gun, forcing him to ingest the cyanide. Marcus had complied, probably hoping to save his own life, not realizing the cyanide would kill him regardless. After Marcus died, Kyle had staged the scene. He'd placed the vial and the water glass on the desk. He'd positioned Marcus's body to look like he'd simply slumped over. He'd placed the forged suicide note prominently. Then Kyle had locked the office door from the inside using the lock button on the handle. He'd exited through the window and locked it from outside, using a thin piece of metal he'd fashioned specifically for that purpose. The locked room had been the key to making it look like suicide. No one could have gotten in or out except through a locked door or locked windows. It seemed impossible that anyone else could have been involved. But Kyle had made one critical mistake. He'd forgotten about the remote access software. When the private investigator found it, Kyle's entire plan unraveled. Police also found evidence that Kyle had been near Marcus's house on the day of the murder. A gas station security camera 2 blocks from Marcus's neighborhood showed Kyle's car at 10:17 in the morning on February 11. The timeline was perfect. Kyle could have been at Marcus's house between 10:30 and noon, plenty of time to commit the murder and stage the scene before returning to Virginia. Kyle Brennan was arrested in Richmond on the 8th of August 2013. He initially maintained his innocence, but when confronted with the overwhelming forensic evidence, he eventually confessed. He admitted to killing Marcus. He said the promotion in 2008 had destroyed his life. He'd been passed over for Marcus, someone he considered less capable. He'd lost his job at Precision Components. His marriage had fallen apart. His career had stalled. He'd blamed Marcus for all of it. In his mind, Marcus had stolen the life that should have been his, so he'd spent years planning the perfect revenge. A locked room murder that would look like suicide. Marcus would die, and everyone would think he'd killed himself. The trial took place in early 2014. The prosecution presented the remote access evidence, the forged note, the timeline, Kyle's confession. The defense tried to argue that Kyle's confession had been coerced, that the evidence was circumstantial. The jury didn't buy it. They deliberated for less than 2 days before returning a guilty verdict on charges of first-degree murder. Kyle Brennan was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge called the crime exceptionally calculated and cold-blooded, noting that Kyle had spent years planning and had shown no remorse even after being caught. Marcus Webb was buried in Memphis next to his father William, who had died 2 years earlier. Dorothy Webb survived her youngest son by only 18 months. Friends said she never recovered from losing Marcus. Sandra never remarried. She moved back to California, where she'd grown up. She rarely speaks about what happened, but those close to her say the betrayal was almost worse than the murder itself. Marcus had trusted Kyle as a colleague. They'd worked together, collaborated, shared ideas. And Kyle had turned that professional relationship into something dark, nursing a grudge for 5 years until it became murder. Kyle is currently incarcerated at Wallens Ridge State Prison in Virginia. He's filed multiple appeals, all of which have been denied. In prison interviews, he's expressed remorse, but has also maintained that he felt he had no choice. Marcus, he claims, had ruined his life. Psychologists who've evaluated him say he shows signs of narcissistic personality disorder and an external locus of control, meaning he blames others for his problems rather than taking responsibility. Marcus Webb's story serves as a reminder that workplace relationships can hide dangerous resentments. Someone can smile at you, work alongside you, and still harbor feelings that can turn deadly. The locked room wasn't perfect after all. Kyle's need to be clever, to create the perfect crime, led to his downfall. The remote access software was the thread that, when pulled, unraveled everything. Revenge is a patient thing. Kyle Brennan waited years, planned every detail, and nearly got away with it. But our next story is about a different kind of obsession, one that doesn't come from revenge, but from a twisted sense of ownership. Let me tell you about a young woman whose art made her a target. The photograph. Rebecca Cole was born on the 5th of January 1995 in Burlington, Vermont, during one of the coldest winters on record. Her mother, Linda, went into labor during a blizzard. The drive to the hospital took twice as long as it should have. Rebecca was the eldest of 3 children. She had 2 younger brothers, Ryan and Michael. Her parents, Linda and Thomas Cole, owned a small bakery called Sweet Rise in downtown Burlington. They'd opened it the year before Rebecca was born. Growing up above a bakery meant Rebecca's childhood smelled like fresh bread and cinnamon. She'd wake up at 5 in the morning to the sounds of her parents working downstairs, preparing the day's pastries. By the time she was 7, she was helping out after school, wiping down tables, refilling napkin dispensers, sometimes helping her mother frost cupcakes. She was good with details, careful and precise in a way that made her useful even at a young age. But what Rebecca truly loved was art, drawing, painting, anything creative. Her elementary school teachers noticed her talent early. By middle school, she was winning local art competitions. When she was 13, her father gave her an old film camera he'd found at a yard sale. It was a Canon AE, one from the 1980s, heavy and mechanical, requiring manual focus and settings. Rebecca fell in love with it immediately. She taught herself photography through library books and online tutorials. She learned about exposure, composition, lighting. She spent hours photographing Burlington, the lake, the streets, the people, the changing seasons. By high school, Rebecca was winning photography competitions regularly. Her photos were exhibited at local galleries. Art teachers told her she had a real future in this, if she wanted to pursue it. She did. After graduating from high school in 2013, Rebecca enrolled in the photography program at the Rhode Island School of Design in Providence. RISD was one of the best art schools in the country. Getting accepted was a major achievement. Her parents were proud, but worried. Art wasn't a stable career. They'd struggled to make the bakery profitable. They understood how hard it was to make a living from creative work, but they supported Rebecca's dream. At RISD, Rebecca thrived. She loved the creative environment, the intensity, the way everyone there was serious about their art. She developed her own style, intimate portraits that captured quiet moments, people in their private worlds. Her professors praised her eye for composition and her ability to capture emotion. She started selling prints online through an Etsy shop. She built a following on Instagram, posting her favorite images. In her junior year, fall of 2015, Rebecca met Owen Matthews. He was a film student, a year ahead of her. He was charismatic and ambitious, talking constantly about moving to Los Angeles after graduation to break into the film industry. They started dating in October. The relationship moved quickly. By December, they were spending almost every night together. Owen was intense, in a way Rebecca found exciting at first. He had big plans, big dreams. He made her feel like they were going to conquer the world together. But as the months went on, Rebecca started noticing things that bothered her. Owen was possessive. He didn't like when she spent time with other friends. He'd get upset if she didn't respond to his texts immediately. He wanted to know where she was, who she was with, what she was doing. She tried to talk to him about it. He'd apologize, say he was just worried about her, that he cared so much. But the behavior continued. Rebecca had her own plans after graduation. She wanted to spend a year abroad, photographing communities in Southeast Asia. She'd been saving money, researching locations, applying for grants. Owen didn't like this idea. He wanted her to move to Los Angeles with him. They argued about it constantly. He'd say things like, "If you really loved me, you'd come with me." Or, "This photography stuff is just a hobby. You need to think about your real future." Rebecca felt increasingly trapped. This wasn't what she wanted. She'd gone to art school to become a photographer, not to be someone's girlfriend in Los Angeles, supporting his career while hers stagnated. In April 2016, 2 months before graduation, Rebecca ended the relationship. She told Owen she needed to focus on her own future, her own goals. She was going to Southeast Asia. She wasn't moving to LA. Owen didn't take it well. He became angry, accusatory. He sent long text messages late at night, sometimes angry, sometimes pleading. Rebecca blocked his number. She asked mutual friends to tell him to leave her alone. She stopped going to places she knew he'd be. After graduation in May, Rebecca moved back to Burlington. She needed to save more money for her trip. She worked at her parents' bakery during the day and spent evenings planning her itinerary, applying for photography grants, preparing her portfolio. Owen tried to contact her a few times through mutual friends. She ignored every attempt. She wanted nothing to do with him. In August 2016, 3 months after moving home, strange things started happening. Rebecca began receiving anonymous messages on Instagram. Her photography account had about 10,000 followers, and she occasionally got weird messages from strangers. But these felt different. They were vague but unsettling. "I know where you are. You can't just leave people behind." Prettier in person than in photos. Rebecca blocked the accounts, but new accounts would appear, sending similar messages. Then the photographs started arriving. Someone sent her pictures of herself, taken from a distance. In one, she was walking from her car to the bakery. In another, she was sitting at a coffee shop, working on her laptop. Someone was following her, taking pictures, watching. Rebecca assumed it was Owen. She blocked more accounts. She reported the messages to Instagram, but the accounts kept coming, and the messages kept arriving. In September, she went to the Burlington Police Department. She showed an officer the messages and the photographs. The officer took a report and advised her to document everything. But unless the messages became explicitly threatening, he said, there wasn't much they could do. Rebecca's parents were alarmed. Her father wanted to hire a private investigator. Rebecca insisted she could handle it. She installed a security camera system around their house. She started varying her routine, taking different routes to work, changing up where she went and when, but the messages continued. They became more personal. Whoever was sending them knew details about her life, her work schedule, her travel plans. the names of her friends. Rebecca felt like she was being watched constantly. She became paranoid, always checking over her shoulder, always wondering if someone was following her. Then, in mid-October, things escalated. Rebecca woke up one morning to find her car had been vandalized. Someone had scratched the word "mine" into the hood with a sharp object. All 4 tires were slashed. She called the police immediately. Officers came, took photos, filed a report. They reviewed security footage from nearby houses, but the cameras hadn't captured the vandalism. It had happened in the middle of the night, and Rebecca's car had been parked on the street, just outside the range of most security cameras. The police asked if she had any idea who might have done this. Rebecca told them about Owen. They contacted him in Los Angeles. Owen denied any involvement. He had an alibi. He'd been working on a film set the night of the vandalism. Multiple people confirmed he'd been there from 6 in the evening until 3 in the morning. His alibi was solid. It couldn't have been him. The police looked into Rebecca's ex-boyfriends from high school, classmates from RISD, who might have developed an obsession. They found nothing concrete. The investigation stalled. Rebecca decided to postpone her trip to Southeast Asia. She didn't feel safe leaving the country while someone was stalking her. Weeks passed. The messages stopped. The stalking seemed to have ended. Rebecca began to relax, thinking maybe the vandalism had scared the person off. In late November, Rebecca received a package at the bakery. It was addressed to her, delivered by regular mail. Inside was a photo album. The album was filled with pictures of Rebecca, hundreds of them. Some were photos she'd posted online. Others were taken without her knowledge. Pictures of her through windows, pictures of her at the grocery store, pictures of her walking her dog. The final page of the album contained a note, typed and unsigned. "You belong to me. You always will." Rebecca took the package straight to the police. Officers examined it for fingerprints. They found nothing useful. The album had been purchased online from a major retailer, and the seller had no record of the buyer's identity. The package had been mailed from a Burlington post office, but security footage from the post office showed dozens of people and no clear suspect. Rebecca was terrified. She moved back in with her parents. She stopped posting on social media entirely. She avoided going out alone. Her parents hired a security company to install an alarm system and additional cameras. Her father started accompanying her whenever she went anywhere. Her brothers took turns staying home to make sure someone was always there. In early December, the stalker made contact again. This time, through a letter slipped under the front door of her parents' house in the middle of the night. The letter was typed, unsigned. It said, "Stop running. I'm closer than you think." Rebecca's father called the police immediately. Officers searched the neighborhood. They found no one suspicious. The letter was sent for analysis. No fingerprints, no DNA, nothing useful. Rebecca's mother suggested she leave Vermont entirely, maybe go stay with relatives in California, start over somewhere far away. Rebecca considered it, but the idea of being driven from her home made her angry. Then, in early January 2017, Rebecca's younger brother Ryan noticed something while scrolling through Instagram. He came across a profile belonging to Jake Perry, Owen's former roommate in Los Angeles. Jake had posted a photo of himself at a bar in Burlington. The timestamp on the photo was from late November, right around the time the photo album had been delivered. Ryan showed the post to Rebecca. She'd met Jake a few times when she was dating Owen. He'd always seemed quiet, a bit awkward. She'd never thought much about him. But why was he in Burlington? He lived in Los Angeles. Or at least, he had. Rebecca contacted the police. Detective Amanda Torres, who'd been handling the case, looked into Jake Perry immediately. What she found was concerning. Jake had moved from Los Angeles to Vermont in early September 2016. He'd rented an apartment in Burlington, only a few miles from Rebecca's parents' house. Torres brought Jake in for questioning on January 12. He denied everything, said he'd moved to Burlington for work, said he barely knew Rebecca, had only met her a couple times through Owen. But when Torres obtained a warrant to search his apartment, they found evidence. A second photo album, identical to the one sent to Rebecca, filled with pictures of her. A burner phone used to send the anonymous messages. rough drafts of the typed letter that had been slipped under Rebecca's door. Jake Perry confessed when confronted with the evidence. He told Detective Torres a disturbing story. He said he developed an obsession with Rebecca after seeing her photographs online. Owen had talked about her constantly after their breakup, showing Jake her Instagram, her photography portfolio, her work. Jake said he felt a connection to Rebecca through her art. He believed they were meant to be together. When Owen mentioned Rebecca had moved back to Burlington, Jake decided to move there too. He said he wanted to meet her, to be part of her life. When she didn't respond to his messages, he escalated. The vandalism, the photo album, the letters he thought if he scared her enough, she'd need protection. And then, he could be the one to protect her. It was a twisted logic, but Jake seemed to genuinely believe it made sense. Jake Perry was charged with stalking, vandalism, and criminal harassment. He pleaded guilty to avoid trial and was sentenced to 2 years in prison and 5 years of probation. He was also ordered to have no contact with Rebecca Cole for the rest of his life. Rebecca didn't attend the sentencing. She was already gone. She'd moved to California in March 2017, living with her aunt in San Francisco. She gave up her plans to travel to Southeast Asia. She no longer felt safe being so far from family. She still photographs, but she doesn't post her work online anymore. She stopped using social media. She sells her prints through private galleries under a pseudonym. She says the experience changed her relationship with her art. Photography had always been about connection for her, about sharing moments with the world. But now, every photograph feels like a vulnerability. Every image she creates could be used by someone with bad intentions. She's also changed how she sees people. She used to be open, friendly, willing to give people the benefit of the doubt. Now she's guarded, suspicious. She doesn't trust easily. Jake was released from prison in 2019. The terms of his probation prohibit him from contacting Rebecca or entering the state of Vermont. He moved back to Los Angeles and, according to public records, still lives there. Rebecca checks periodically to make sure he's complying with the restraining order. She says she still looks over her shoulder. She still varies her routine. The fear, she says, never fully goes away. Her parents still run the bakery in Burlington, but Rebecca rarely visits. She talks to them on the phone weekly, but returning to Vermont brings back too many memories. She's 30 now. She's building a new life in California. She has a few close friends who know her story, but she doesn't talk about it much. She says what bothers her most isn't that Jake was obsessed with her, it's that she never saw it coming. He'd seemed like a normal person, a bit quiet, a bit awkward, but harmless. She'd met him several times and never once felt uncomfortable. And that's what scares her most. The danger was there all along, hiding behind a friendly face, and she had no idea. The fear Rebecca felt never fully left her. Even now, she looks over her shoulder. We've explored murders, disappearances, and stalking tonight. Our final case brings us to a quieter kind of evil, the exploitation of trust in its most vulnerable form. Let me tell you about an inheritance, and the woman who nearly stole it all, the inheritance. Meredith Palmer was born on the 22nd of May, 1941, in Savannah, Georgia, on a Thursday morning just before dawn. Her mother, Elizabeth, delivered her at home with the help of a midwife, as was common for wealthy families in the South at that time. Meredith was the eldest of 2 daughters, born into the Whitmore family, one of Savannah's oldest and most prominent families. Her father, Robert Whitmore, owned a fleet of cargo vessels that operated along the eastern seaboard, continuing a family business that dated back to the 1800s. The family lived in a large colonial estate overlooking the Savannah River on 5 acres of carefully maintained grounds. Meredith grew up with governesses, private tutors, and expectations of propriety that came with her family's standing. She was educated at private schools in Savannah and later attended a finishing school in Charleston, South Carolina. She learned French, piano, and the social graces expected of young women of her class. She learned how to host parties, how to make conversation, how to represent her family with elegance. In 1962, at age 21, Meredith married Charles Palmer. Charles came from another prominent Savannah family. His father was a federal judge. Charles himself was a lawyer with a growing reputation in corporate law. The marriage pleased both families. It was appropriate, expected, a union that made sense socially and financially. Meredith and Charles had 2 children, a son, Graham, born in 1964, and a daughter, Elise, born in 1967. They raised the children in a different section of the same estate where Meredith had grown up. Her parents had given them the East Wing as a wedding present. Meredith's life was comfortable and privileged. She participated in charity work, served on the boards of several cultural organizations, and hosted dinner parties for Charles's business associates. She played her role in Savannah society with the same grace her mother had taught her. In 1989, Charles died suddenly of a heart attack. He was only 54 years old, in seemingly good health. He'd been playing tennis at the country club when he collapsed. He died before the ambulance arrived. Meredith inherited Charles's entire estate, which was substantial. Combined with her own family wealth, she became one of the wealthiest widows in Georgia. Her children were grown by then. Graham was working as a hedge fund manager in New York. Elise was living in Atlanta, running a nonprofit focused on historic preservation. They visited occasionally, but had their own lives, their own families. Meredith lived alone in the family estate. She had household staff, of course a cook, a housekeeper who came 3 times a week, a groundskeeper who maintained the property. But her daily life was solitary. As she aged, Meredith became less involved in social activities. She stopped serving on boards. She declined invitations to events. She preferred to stay home, reading, tending to her garden, maintaining the routines she'd established over decades. By 2015, at age 74, Meredith's children were growing concerned about her living alone. The estate was large. If something happened, if she fell or had a medical emergency, it might be hours before anyone found her. Graham and Elise suggested she hire a live-in caretaker, someone who could help with daily tasks, manage medications, provide companionship. Meredith resisted at first, but eventually agreed. Through a referral from her doctor, Meredith hired Angela Howe in June 2015. Angela was 46 years old, a certified nursing assistant with excellent references. She'd worked for several wealthy families in the Savannah area, always receiving glowing recommendations. Angela moved into one of the guest rooms on the 2nd floor. Her responsibilities included preparing meals, managing Meredith's medication schedule, accompanying her to doctor's appointments, and handling some household management tasks. Graham and Elise were initially pleased with the arrangement. Their mother seemed happy to have the company. Angela was professional, efficient, and seemed genuinely fond of Meredith. Over the following months, Angela became indispensable. She took over more and more of the household management. She dealt with repairmen, managed the cleaning schedule, even started handling some of Meredith's correspondence. Meredith seemed content to let Angela take charge. She was in her mid-70s and tired of managing a large household. But by early 2017, Graham started noticing changes when he visited. Angela seemed to be making decisions about household matters without consulting Meredith. She'd redecorated parts of the house. She'd dismissed the longtime housekeeper and hired a new one. She'd changed which doctor Meredith saw for her regular checkups. When Graham asked his mother about these changes, Meredith said she trusted Angela completely and was happy to let her handle things. Graham felt uneasy, but didn't want to seem controlling. His mother was mentally sharp and capable of making her own decisions. Then, in June 2017, Meredith's lawyer, William Thornton, contacted Graham. William had been the family's attorney for 30 years. He said Meredith had updated her will, and he thought Graham should know. The new will left a substantial portion of Meredith's estate to Angela Howe, specifically $2 million in cash, the guest house on the property, and several valuable pieces of jewelry. Graham was shocked. Angela had only been working for his mother for 2 years. Why would Meredith leave her such a significant inheritance? He called Elise immediately. She was equally confused. They decided Graham should talk to their mother directly. The conversation didn't go well. Graham asked Meredith why she'd changed her will to benefit Angela. Meredith became defensive. She said Angela had been kinder to her than her own children. She said Graham and Elise only called when they needed something or wanted to check on their inheritance. Graham tried to explain that wasn't true, that he was concerned about her being influenced. Meredith became angry. She accused Graham of being greedy, of only caring about her money. The argument ended with Meredith telling Graham to leave. He did, frustrated and worried. He shared his concerns with Elise. She tried to mediate, calling their mother to smooth things over, but Meredith remained firm. Angela deserved to be in the will. She'd earned it through her loyalty and service. Over the next year, Meredith's health declined. In early 2018, at age 76, she was diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment. Her doctor recommended she consider moving to an assisted living facility where she could receive more comprehensive care. Angela insisted she could provide adequate care at home. She said Meredith would be more comfortable in her own house, in familiar surroundings. Meredith agreed with Angela. She didn't want to leave her home. Graham and Elise felt they couldn't force her, not when she was still legally competent to make her own decisions. But as the months passed, Graham and Elise found it increasingly difficult to visit their mother. Angela controlled access. She'd tell them Meredith was too tired for visitors, or that the doctor had recommended limiting stress, or that Meredith didn't want to see them. When they did manage to visit, Meredith seemed confused, drowsy, not quite herself. Angela explained that the doctor had adjusted her medications and the new prescriptions made her sleepy. In November 2018, Meredith was hospitalized with pneumonia. She spent a week at Candler Hospital in Savannah. While she was in the hospital and Angela wasn't controlling access, Graham and Elise were finally able to spend time with their mother. Meredith seemed more alert than she had in months. She was confused about some things, but overall seemed more like herself. Graham decided to use this opportunity to review his mother's financial affairs. He had power of attorney for financial matters, though Angela had been handling the day-to-day management. What he discovered alarmed him. Over the past 2 years, there had been dozens of transfers from Meredith's accounts into Angela's personal account. The transfers had started small, a few $1,000s here and there, labeled as household expenses or medical costs. But over time, the amounts had grown. $5,000, $10,000, $20,000. Graham calculated that Angela had transferred more than $200,000 from Meredith's accounts into her own over the course of 2 years. He immediately contacted William Thornton, the family lawyer. Together, they contacted the police. An investigation was launched. Detective Robert Hayes was assigned to the case. He'd worked financial exploitation cases before and knew what to look for. When Angela learned of the investigation, she insisted everything had been legitimate. She said Meredith had given her the money willingly. She said Meredith was grateful for her care and wanted to ensure Angela was financially secure. But when investigators interviewed Meredith in the hospital, her responses were confused. She said she trusted Angela and assumed the money was being used for household expenses. She didn't realize Angela had been transferring funds into her own account. Meredith's doctor was also interviewed. Dr. Patricia Vance said she'd been treating Meredith for mild cognitive impairment, but the symptoms had worsened significantly over the past year. She was concerned about the medications Meredith was taking. According to Meredith's records, she was being given higher doses of sedatives than Dr. Vance had prescribed. When asked about this, Angela claimed there must be an error in the records. But pharmacy records showed Angela had been picking up prescriptions and specifically requesting higher doses, claiming the doctor had called in adjustments. The doctor had never called in any such adjustments. Angela had been giving Meredith excessive amounts of sedatives, keeping her drowsy and compliant. Angela Howe was arrested on the 18th of December 2018. She was charged with financial exploitation of an elderly person, administering harmful substances, and fraud. She maintained her innocence throughout, claiming she'd only been helping Meredith and that the family was trying to frame her because they were greedy and didn't like her influence over their mother. The case went to trial in the summer of 2019. The prosecution presented evidence of the unauthorized transfers, the altered medication doses, and testimony from Meredith's doctor about the cognitive decline that had accelerated under Angela's care. They also presented testimony from William Thornton, the family lawyer. He said Meredith had been mentally sharp and financially savvy her entire life. The idea that she would give $200,000 to a caretaker she'd known for only 2 years made no sense. Angela's defense argued that Meredith had been grateful for Angela's care and had voluntarily given her the money, They claim the family was upset about Meredith's affection for Angela and was trying to punish her for being close to their mother. But the evidence was overwhelming. The jury found Angela guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to 15 years in prison. The judge called her actions a profound betrayal of trust and noted that she'd specifically targeted a vulnerable elderly woman. Angela was also ordered to repay the money she'd stolen, though much of it had already been spent. She'd used it to pay off debts, buy a car, and take vacations. Meredith's will was contested by her children. Given evidence of Angela's manipulation and Meredith's cognitive decline at the time the will was changed, a judge ruled that the revised will was invalid. Meredith's original will, which left her estate to Graham and Elise, was reinstated. Meredith moved into an assisted living facility in early 2020. Once her medications were properly adjusted and the excessive sedatives were discontinued, her cognitive function improved somewhat. She remained confused about some things, but was generally more alert. She seemed to have limited memory of the extent of Angela's betrayal. When Graham tried to explain what had happened, she became upset and confused. Eventually, he stopped trying to make her understand. It seemed kinder to let it go. Meredith died in October 2021 at the age of 80. The cause was heart failure. She'd been in declining health for months. Graham and Elise both expressed regret that they hadn't acted sooner. They'd seen signs that something was wrong. Their mother's increased dependence on Angela, Angela's control over access, the changes in Meredith's behavior. But they'd trusted their mother's judgment and hadn't wanted to seem overbearing. By the time they realized what was happening, $200,000 had been stolen, and their mother's health had been compromised. The estate was settled according to Meredith's original will. Graham and Elise divided the property and assets. The family estate was eventually sold. Neither of them wanted to keep it, given what had happened there. The new owners were unaware of the property's recent history. They renovated extensively, turning it into a bed and breakfast that caters to tourists visiting Savannah's historic district. Angela Howe is currently incarcerated at Pulaski State Prison in Georgia. She has maintained her innocence and continues to claim she was only trying to help Meredith. She's filed multiple appeals, all of which have been denied. In a letter she wrote to a local newspaper, Angela said, "I devoted years of my life to caring for Meredith Palmer. I loved her, like family. Her children abandoned her, and I was the one who was there every day. I deserved to be compensated for my loyalty." The letter drew outrage from elder advocacy groups who pointed out that caretakers are already compensated through their wages and that stealing from vulnerable clients is never justified. Graham Palmer has since become an advocate for elder financial abuse prevention. He speaks at conferences and works with organizations that help families identify the warning signs of exploitation. He says the experience taught him that financial abuse often happens gradually. It starts with small boundary crossings, a caretaker who takes on more responsibilities, who becomes indispensable, who slowly isolates the elderly person from family and friends. By the time families realize what's happening, significant damage has already been done. Meredith's story, tragic as it is, serves as a warning. Trust is essential in caretaker relationships, but it must be balanced with oversight and accountability. When families abdicate their responsibility to monitor their loved one's care, predators like Angela Howe can thrive. And that brings us to the end of tonight's journey through Twisted Betrayal. 6 stories, 6 lives forever changed by deception. Some cases were solved, some remain mysteries. But all of them remind us that betrayal often comes from those we trust most. Thank you for spending this time with me in the darkness. If these stories helped you through a sleepless night, I'd be grateful if you'd leave a like and subscribe. Your support helps me bring you more cases like these. Until next time, sleep well. Or try to.